for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement statement. We honor and thank the Indigenous peoples of Ontario as the original inhabitants and custodians of these lands. We pay tribute to their legacy and the legacy of all First Peoples of Canada as we strengthen ties with the communities we serve and together build the future for all Canadians. So with that, I'd like to sort of introduce our theme. Our theme today is changing boat behavior with a focus on wakes and regulations. We, as Safe Quiet Lakes, have conducted 3 different surveys over the past 10 years. And in our most recent survey last summer in 2021, we had close to 6,000 people respond to it, making this one of the largest surveys of lake issues across North America. One of the things that we saw that was a little bit different this year was the increase in people using personal powered vessels. So we had an increase of kayaking by 16%. We had an increase in paddle boating up by 33%. And we feel that this has changed the way people feel on the water, their sense of vulnerability when they're on a personally powered craft is a little bit different than when they're on the power boat. So once again, wakes came up as one of the top issues of concern. And most of it was around that increased sensitivity and vulnerability on the water. 71% supported no wake zones to protect people and wildlife in sensitive areas. And for the first time, there was I guess a desire to add legislative and enforcement solutions to education. And I think that when we looked at the quick little poll that we did at the beginning of this, we see that that's pretty consistent with this group as well. So today we would like to have a collaborative discussion on the research and the regulations around wakes and how everyone can enjoy the lakes as a shared environment or a shared space. And I'm super excited. I'm just going to go to our, there we go. There's our agenda for today. So we are going to start with greetings from our Member of Parliament. After that, we are going to break into 2 sections. One will be wakes speakers, and then regulation speakers with a QA after each one, and then a wrap up. And I will introduce those speakers in the next section. If Scott Atchison is here, I would love to have you greet us with a few words from you.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be here. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
I'll be very brief, which is not necessarily common for a politician, but I just want to say that I've met, of course, with representatives from Safe Quiet Lakes a number of times now, and I always appreciate the thoughtful work and research that the group does, and always look forward to the recommendations that come forward from your work. I live on a lake, and so I particularly appreciate the suggestions because I think they make a lot of sense. And of course, there's a lot of work to do. I know that at the municipal level, which is where, of course, I used to work before becoming a federal member of Parliament, the municipalities do a lot of work to protect the shoreline and the trophic zone of the lake. But of course, there's so much that goes on the lake that can affect that lifeblood of the lake as well. And it's not, of course, just about protecting the life of the lake, but it's also about making sure that everybody can enjoy the lake, that lives around it and also uses it. So I appreciate everyone's engagement and everyone being here today. I look forward to hearing what comes out of this, and if there's anything that we can be doing at the federal level and I can be advocating for to make improvements to make sure that the waterways of Canada are enjoyable for everybody and safe for everybody. So thank you very much, and have a great day of dialogue.
Thank you very much, Scott. We appreciate that. We appreciate you joining us today. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce our first set of speakers. We have Dr. Chris Hauser, who is the Dean of Science at University of Windsor, and he's also the interim Vice President of Research and Innovation for the University of Windsor, and he has done a lot of amazing research around wakes in various areas. That will be followed with a presentation by Jasmine Northcott from Water Ski and Wakeboard Canada. And Jasmine is the CEO of Water Ski and Wakeboard Canada, and their group is working on a number of great initiatives around education. I have Dawn here, but actually Dawn will be part of the next section, so I apologize for that. So with that, I introduce you to Chris Hauser, and Chris, you can begin sharing your desktop and make yourself visible to us. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And really thank you for the opportunity to present some of the research that we have been doing over the last couple of years with respect to boat wakes. Just as background, as Diana introduced me, I'm at the University of Windsor, but in fact, I grew up in the Huntsville-Parry Sound region. And so spending time on the Muskoka Lakes was part of my childhood. And we still own a cottage in the Parry Sound region on Whitestone Lake, and in this picture in the background, that is my son on our powerboat going down the Whitestone Lake. Now, I want to step back a little bit to where I got started in boat wakes, and that was on the Savannah River in Georgia, working for the National Park Service, looking at how post-Panamax ships moving up the Savannah River might be impacting Fort Pulaski, a national or Civil War historical site. And what we were finding is that, in fact, yes, these large Panamax and post-Panamax ships were impacting the shoreline, but it wasn't them that were the biggest issue. It was actually the large yachts, as well as what are called the pilot boats that bring the river pilots out to the ships at sea. And what was happening is we were seeing these waves coming in, and they were impacting the shoreline, creating considerable amount of erosion and taking away the marsh. And really the reason for that is these waves would come in straight at the marsh face. They would suspend a large amount of sediment that was then transported down along the river. Now, ultimately, this was not set up by the boats, but rather was set up by oyster shells that were placed down to try to protect the shoreline from the boats. The boat wakes were moving those oyster shells, they smothered the marsh, and as a result, the marsh vegetation died, and the marsh started to retreat even faster under those wakes, simply because the wakes come in, they're very large waves of 50 to 60 centimeters in height, and can suspend a considerable amount of sand, much more than would be suspended by the wind waves or by the current moving down the river. So the one point there is that sometimes in the protection of a coastal system, we actually might exacerbate the problem and accelerate the rate of erosion. Now, more recently, I was working on Lake Conway in Florida, in the Orlando region. And this was just around the pandemic time, so we didn't do a lot of field work, but we were asked by their homeowners association to look at the impact of wake boats. And really, this lake is important because it's the home of the Australian wakeboard team during the Australian winter. So you would have up to 50 passes of wake boats per day around this relatively small lake that had a number of cottages and a non-rocky but kind of easily suspended material at the shoreline. Now, the boat wake industry, and in fact, some of the lobbyists that had been part of this actually lived on the same lake. It was just quite the coincidence of people there. And they did some initial work that looked at how boat wakes, and in fact, wake boats, how those waves would attenuate with distance from the shoreline. And so starting with sensor number 1 right beside the boat, that wave is quite large, but given time and the dispersion of the wave, which is basically it's spreading out. Waves travel at speeds that are directly dependent upon their wavelength. Longer waves travel faster than shorter waves. And so what they were finding is that by a distance, quite a distance from that sailing line, is that in fact the boat wake was relatively small, and in fact would therefore have negligible impact on that of the shoreline. And if you look at all the different wave heights versus distance from the boat track, they were all showing that what might have been a 30 or 25 inch wake generated right beside the boat, by the time it gets towards the shoreline, maybe 300 to 350 feet away, with only about 10 to 15 inches, or under some of the shallower waters, might have even dropped down to 5 inches. This was demonstrated by the Wakeboard Association that in fact that wakes were not problematic along the shoreline. One of the problems that the cottagers noticed is that in fact the study was assuming that the wakes were being generated by boats that were in the middle of the lake. And as you can see, it's a pretty small lake, but the wakes were coming in very close. And I do apologize for the shakiness of this particular video. But these waves were not attenuating fully. They were not fully dispersing as they would come towards the shoreline. As a result, the vast majority of homeowners had to put up revetments to protect the shoreline. Again, it's a very easily suspended material, as well as they were having to change up their docking systems because of the size of the waves that were coming in. And you can see the size of this wake that is at the shoreline. But what we had was a problem, is that the initial study that had been done said that the wakes were negligible. But what you can see just from this picture is that in fact they might be quite strong. So we then started to look at doing some very simple modeling of what the wake size would be and what wind waves would actually be along that shoreline. And as you just saw at the very beginning of that video, the lake is maybe 2 kilometers in total distance from shore to shore. It's not very large whatsoever, and boats are usually within probably about 500 feet of the shoreline. So what we did is we did a simple test, and we just looked at and predicted the size of the wind waves that would be generated from different edges of the lake and from different directions over the course of the year. And what we found is just by doing that very simple analysis that the vessel wakes were probably not that important. But that was under the assumption that in fact the boats were traveling down the dead center of the lake. In fact, maybe a kilometer or 2 kilometers away on the far shoreline. So we reversed the analysis and said, well, instead of trying to figure out what would be the wake for a given point, at what point or what distance from shoreline would these boat wakes be the same amount of energy as the wind waves? And what we found is probably just most important to look at this third column that starts with the number 609, is it's saying that throughout the year, that you would have to be, if you were driving a wake boat within about 200 meters or 600 to 700 feet of the shoreline, that in fact, that could represent 100% of the total energy that is being approached to the shoreline or by wind waves. Therefore, boat wakes were not negligible on this lake, they were sizable. Now, the question is, what is the impact? Is that sufficient to cause shoreline damage? Is that sufficient to cause infrastructure damage? Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we weren't able to complete this study by doing a little bit more analysis on the impact. So during the pandemic, simply because we couldn't go anywhere, we decided to move the studies to our lake. And this is our little rowboat, little motor boat that the kids can drive, going down one small section of Whitestone Lake. And really the point here is that this boat is generating very large waves. It's loaded down with some people, as well as it's moving at a plowing speed. So it's not just that wakes are bad, is that how they are driven, and this was my daughter driving, how they were driven, where they are driven, can have very different impacts along the shoreline. This boat at planing speed would probably have no impact within this area, but because of the narrowness of that section, we weren't able to drive at true planing speeds, or we would just have to be going to the slowest speeds possible in a very narrow channel that is actually quite busy. So we decided to look at what would be the impact and better understanding how these recreational boats. My son is here just showing the different types of wakes. This is now we're at displacement. He's now moving into what's called plowing, where you're just pushing that water in front of you. I'm not doing a very good job of driving the drone at this exact moment. I almost crashed it right there. And now he's going to move his way up into planing speed. And unfortunately, the video just stopped at that exact moment. But you get these different types of wakes depending upon the speed of the boat and how it is moving, which also then depends upon the shape of the boat, the type of the boat. Now, not only is it dependent upon the speed of the boat and the shape and the size, it also depends upon the water depth. Now, most regulations refer to speeds within distance of a shoreline, but also depth of the water becomes quite important. It changes the shape of the wake and whether the transverse of the bow wake is more important. In deep water, which we're most accustomed to, you got this well-defined bow wake and transverse wake that move forward. But the shallower and shallower you get, the stronger that wake starts to become until the point at which you just basically have a curtain of waves. That changes not only the size of the wake, but it also changes how far down that wake may penetrate to the bottom, resuspending sediment, changing your water temperatures, etc. Now, we started a very simple study, and this is our neighbor's boat moving slowly through one of these channels and at this displacement speed. And we then put in a series of pressure sensors around Whitestone Lake, and we focused at our particular cottage. Our cottage is at the longest length of the shore of the lake, and it has the strongest wind waves associated with it. So we thought, well, how much do boat wakes actually represent? And what you've got in this small little graph at the bottom is what one of those pressure sensors would show. It would show just before the boat came through a relatively flat water. The wake comes through and you've got these very large waves. Well, actually, in this case, you don't get very large waves. You're getting about 4 to 5 centimeter waves. But what we found very interesting, very different from Conway, from other boat studies, is that the waves kept going. It's hard to see in this dark picture right now, but the shoreline here is rocky. And so as a result, when those wakes reached the shoreline, they reflected. And so you had a lot of reflected waves coming off those adjacent shorelines, and that reflection kept going. It kept going so that if you look at the front and the start and the end of this time series, it's flat at the beginning, and at the end, it still has residual little tiny ripples essentially on that water surface. It is a disturbed surface. So we put our first pressure sensor directly at our cottage, right, looking down the main fetch, one of the main fetches of this lake, where we've got a very strong west wind. When we do get wind waves, the waves can be quite sizable, 50 to 25 centimeters in height. It is also directly aligned to the main sailing line, probably about 300 meters directly lakeward of where we are sitting. So we saw a large amount of boat activity. So we started to count up over the entire period from May to September, all the different wind waves that came through, and we can identify the difference between a wind wave and a boat wake. And then we also then considered the boat wakes, and we were able to separate each one of those wakes out. And what we found is that recreational boat wakes on this lake, and despite the fetch, the length over the distance over which the wind was blowing, accounted for 60% of all the wave energy in 2020. Now, the problem though is that is just simply the wake, that main primary wave that is generated by the boat. When you then consider the reflected waves, parts that are bouncing off the adjacent shoreline, and when you consider the residual, boat wakes actually accounted for 80% of all wave energy on the lake. That means that there is and you can just see it in this picture. There's 2 boats in the picture, one underneath, one coming in. But if you actually count the number of wakes, there are 7 different wakes in this picture. Some of them are directly generated by a boat that would have passed just before this. Others are being reflected off the adjacent shorelines. So it's saying that in fact, boat wakes are a primary source, or could be a primary source of wave energy in cottage lakes in Northern Ontario. Now, that doesn't say anything about the damage it can do. It doesn't say anything about infrastructure. It doesn't say anything about sediment resuspension, algal blooms, temperature, noise. This just says that they are a dominant source of energy. But we do know, and this is one picture that happened during that exact same summer, 2020 was extremely high water levels. We had to completely change up how our water system was working. Our main dock was completely flooded. A cement dock that sticks out was completely flooded. And so when these wakes came through, we actually had damage to our water system, damage to our dock system, etc. But that was a rare case associated with high water levels. But the point there being is that sometimes wakes may not be an impact, but at high water levels or even at low water levels, they can. So it's not just about the wake itself, it's the wake in the context of what the lake is at that spot. Now, that also raises the question about shoreline habitat. So you start to see these wakes moving through. And one of the things that we are going to be looking at next year is how, in fact, the marsh habitat around this lake and many other lakes are aligned to wind wave directions as well as boat wake activity. You can see a boat wake moving through this small marsh. That marsh is at a location that is protected from the wind waves, but it's not protected by the boat wakes. Has this had an impact historically on the size of that marsh, how far it extended, the vegetation types, etc.? We're looking at that in the next year. But one of the surprising things that we did find was the impact of jet skis. Now, I can say that jet skis are a lot of fun to drive. And we tend to think of them as not being impactful because they go in a straight line, and most measurements have always been done in straight line. But rather, what we're finding is that most times where you start to see these waves, you can just see how much wake there. And again, I apologize for the drone video. How much wave activity is associated with these two jet skis just sitting and tooling in the middle of the lake. So even the smaller vessels can have an impact by the continuity of their activity. So this raised a question we wanted to look at. Well, it's not just one boat. It's not just boating's bad. It's not that there are sensitive areas. There are areas that are going to be more wind wave, more boat wakes. There's going to be some that are going to have big boat wakes, but really no impact. So with the generous support of this organization, we then started to run a study in the Muskoka Lakes. And we then placed out about 10 different pressure sensors around the lake. And we'd like to thank everyone who participated in this program over last summer. We are still analyzing the data, but what I can show you two different examples here. And this is coming from two different sections of lake on June 11th. So this is not a busy time during the lake. It's not the main part of the summer. What you find is that in June is also when you tend to get larger wind waves. So June is a wind wave active time, not a boat wake active time. So we're going to see something different when we actually get to August and July. So what we found is that boat wakes, even in June, represent about 60% of the time, but about 30% of the energy in some places. That's that yellow one. Whereas in the red spot, on the little island, boat wakes represent only 24% of the time, but 50% of the energy. Now, what you see here are the time series of several thousand seconds of wave activity. In this top, you see that there's a lot of wind waves, but then you can pick out these boat wakes that might be coming through. And this bottom graph, I'm not going to get into the math of it, but these are called wavelets, and they break apart the signal. And we can see boat wakes as these little inverted comma type structures in the wavelet. And you can see them really well in this bottom one. These inverted commas, once we can extract those and we extract the energy of them, we can figure out how much the wake represents relative to all the rest of the wave energy. And again, it does represent a significant amount of that energy, even independent of the time. Now, again, we're still analyzing this data, wide range of lakes, but it tells you that wakes aren't problematic everywhere. There are sensitive areas. There are areas where they're going to be higher, they're going to be lower. It's going to vary through time. It's going to vary with water level. All of those pieces come together. Simultaneously with that study, we've been running a study at Lake Rosalind near Hanover. And I didn't even know there was a lake in this area, but there is this really tiny lake that was dammed, and it's an old marl pit from the turn of the century. And the entire lake is about 500 meters wide. There are 3 wake boats that sit on this lake. Most of the cottagers have just kayaks, but there's 3 wake boats that go around the lake. And so what we did is we did the exact same study. We put the sensors in at 3 locations, and over what you see as a course of 1 week of wave activity. The lake is so small that it doesn't have very active or very large wind waves. And what you see is at about 10 o'clock and 9:30 in the morning, the waves pick up because people are now getting into their boats, and it cycles right through till about 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the evening, and the wave activity shuts down. On this particular lake, boat wakes represent nearly 100% of all the energy. Now, the reason for studying this is that this lake is being affected by algal blooms. And so the one theory that we have right now is that as these wakes are moving through, it's very shallow lake, lots of wave energy. The waves are piercing down to the bottom. You are resuspending a lot of sediment. You are changing the temperature profile within the lake, simultaneous with having all of the cottages and the runoff associated with them. Algal blooms have been increasing and proportionally to the amount of wave activity on this lake. At least that's what we have been told. We're going to be coming back to this lake to do a bit further work to look at how the wakes are in fact resuspending sediment and in fact changing temperature. And there's evidence from that from the United States and some work that was done in Tampa using a very similar system to what we've seen before. You can see it here with this from this drone shot, this boat moving through and the sediment that is being resuspended at the back end of the prop wash. So in shallow water, boats may in fact represent a significant amount of that resuspension. But when you've got resuspension, you've got prop wash, you also change your temperature profile. What that means, what is the impact? Does it even have an impact? We still don't know. That represents where we are heading in the future. And the study that we are now starting in 2023, continuing on to another lake and hopefully keeping our sensors in the existing lakes, but moving to a third lake is Lake Manitowabing. Very different from the other ones that we have studied. This is a much more complex lake. It is dammed. It is actually an artificial lake that is formed by the damming that then brought together three rivers that you see the old pattern and old wetland systems. And as these boats actually come through, you actually get these wakes that are eroding the shoreline. What used to be much more grassy, vegetated shorelines has eroded back to the bedrock. So as a result, you're getting a lot of shoreline resuspension. And as a result, you're getting that cloudier water. They have an algal bloom problem the same way, but you're also changing your temperatures because it is a relatively shallow lake. That's where we are going to be working on later this year. And in fact, I'm doing a presentation to the cottages and the homeowners around Lake Manitowabing later this evening. So the questions that we have and really represents just at the front of the research that we are doing in Northern Ontario. And so by no means do we have a conclusive answer here. But we still need to better understand what is the relative importance of wakes in Northern Ontario lakes. How does that then vary by the vessel type, the speed, the sailing line, the shoreline, the depth? There's so many variables that would ultimately determine what areas are sensitive and what areas are not. To then provide a threshold as to what might be the impact of boat wakes on shoreline habitat and infrastructure. Maybe it represents 80% of the wave energy, but is that enough to actually have an impact? We don't know that. We just know it does represent the primary source of energy today. And also to get a better understanding as to public perception of boat wakes and what issues they may raise. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Diana. I think I kept within my time, and I'm happy to take questions later on.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. That was really interesting, and we're looking forward to having the release of your study later on in the springtime, I believe, and to working with you to continue the next part of your research. So I'd now like to pass this over to Jasmine Northcott, CEO of Water Ski and Wake Boat Canada, and Jasmine, you can turn your camera on as well as share your desktop.
It's saying that I can't start my video because the host has stopped it.
That would be on to you, Crystal, please.
Okay, can you see me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, and nice to be here this morning. So thank you. So I'm Jasmine Northcott. I'm the CEO with Water Ski and Wakeboard Canada. Water Ski and Wakeboard Canada is the national governing body for towed water sports in Canada, and we're responsible for coordinating and growing and developing towed water sports from initiation to high performance. Now, our vision is to advance the growth, innovation, and excellence of towed water sports, and we do that through facilitating the opportunity to grow towed water sports. And when I say towed water sports, I mean water skiing, wakeboarding, barefooting, wake surfing, etc. For anyone who wants to be engaged in the sport. And we do that through grassroots programming straight up to high performance national and international competition. We have 4 pillars of how we engage around our mandate, and that's through funding, community, coordinated infrastructure, and partnerships. And partnerships is a key one, like today, in terms of using our shared expertise around important initiatives to really promote our sport, but as well as issues important in and around the sport. And certainly in guiding our work, we're guided by our values of innovation, accountability, respect and care, excellence, and unity. As it pertains to towed water sports and its impact on lakes and whatnot across the country, we have 78 clubs and schools who are members of Water Ski and Wakeboard Canada, who are insured under our association. And why I say that is because as insured entities under our association, they have been trained under our national coaching certification program. So we are aligned with the Coaching Association of Canada. Our training programs are recognized by that national body. The entity in Canada that's certifies coaches, and our coaching curriculum, which all of our clubs and schools are required to do, talks about engaging in the sport in a safe and respectful manner. We talk about both paths. We talk about and provide training on how to operate boats while engaging in towed water sports in a way that's going to have the least impact on your shared space on the water when they're engaging in towed water sports activities. And the interesting piece that we found, especially over the last 2 years with the pandemic, with there being more and more interest in towed water sports, is interest by the general public in wanting to learn how to operate their watercraft in a towed water sports setting, and approaching our clubs and schools to get a driving lesson, to learn how to tow their kids, whether it's on a tube, skis, waterboard, surf, or wakeboard, or surfboard. And so we actually did programming specifically for women and girls over the last 2 years. And part of that included the opportunity to learn how to drive a boat and operate in a safe way. And that's because we already have a curriculum in place that we use with our tournament drivers and our clubs and schools. And so what that got us thinking about was, how can we take this and move it out to the general public and expand this body of knowledge and this body of skill and expertise that we have around boat driver training and safety in support of a safe, respectful, and skillful towed water sports experience, not only for those who are engaging in the sport, but for those who are also sharing the space with those who engage in the sport. And so what we've done is we are currently in the process of taking our existing course design and revamping it to a public application. And so with the goals of this being around safety and skills, the goals of this course that we're designing are for new boat drivers to complete on-water training and leave the course with a realistic measurement of their boat safety driving capabilities, to have the relevant tools and references to continue to improve their skills, to enjoy.
Jasmine, can I
Yeah.
just, your slides are not advancing, so I'm not sure if there's just one slide, but I think I remember that there were a few, so perhaps you can just
Oh,
move your slides forward just so we can
no,
all go along, because I know you've got some great visuals there.
oh, I did. Oh, that's so weird because they're advanced on my side. Okay. Let's so you're only seeing the title slide?
Yes.
Oh, weird.
If it's not working, then that's fine. Then just go ahead.
That's so weird. Well, let me okay, so when I move that slide, you don't see it, eh? You're still on the
Yes.
that's so
You-
weird.
Are you on slideshow perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's not worry about it. Let's
Ah, that's too bad because I had some good visuals. Okay, well, I'll try to share it once more, but that's so bizarre. Okay, well, can you see that anyways? This isn't can you see the girl on water skis?
There we go. You've got it.
Okay, so we won't have it in slideshow mode, but at least you can see it.
Awesome.
But yeah, so we've taken the curriculum that we currently have for our clubs and schools and for our tournament drivers, and we're building it out into a public facing boat driver training and safety program specifically geared to towed water sports, which we would then be able to offer out through our clubs, our schools, and ideally our marina partners and anyone else who would be interested in providing this training out to their stakeholders. So it could be cottage associations or other interested parties. And we're tiering the course over 3 parts. So part A is the theory and safety around how to engage in towed water sports in a safe and respectful way. And this would be offered online or in person. And it would really focus on, how to engage in towed water sports in terms of the equipment and the requirements you need and how that all plays out on the water, the public lake etiquette. So really, talking about where to be doing towed water sports, making sure that it's not close to shore, making sure you've got, well and good understanding of the rights of way, making sure you understand the implication of both paths and how that impacts not only the safe operation of the vessel in the context of towed water sports, but also in terms of returning to the dock, picking up fallen participants, etc., and talking about all the different situations that could occur when engaged in the sport. And so that one we're looking to have online, easily accessible by the public, straight across the board. For those who want a bit more hands-on training, we're then creating a practical component. And so this is where you could go and get some boat driving lessons in the context of towed water sports. And so you get the kind of the best of both worlds. You get basically a driving lesson on how to operate your watercraft, and at the same time then also learning how to operate that watercraft in a towed water sports setting. And then for those who are interested, we also would offer an evaluation and certification process. And should you have, should you feel you have, good understanding of the theory and safety around operating a vessel and towed water sports, and you feel that your practical skills are really good, you could jump ahead to the evaluation and certification part, but it would involve both a written and on-water assessment. And so we had really hoped to have had this program ready to roll by now, but unfortunately I've had some staffing issues on my side that's delayed it, but we're really hoping to get this up and out to the general public as soon as possible, and really be able to work with our partners to help to ensure a really safe, respectful, and responsible way to support and engage in towed water sports. So I don't think I've gone over. But certainly, I'm happy to share additional information with folks should you be interested. And I've got my email up there, and certainly welcome you to reach out to me at any time. But yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jasmine. It looks like you are doing some fantastic work around education for the sport on etiquette and understanding the impact of wakes. And I mean, it is a lot of fun to be on the water on those water sports. And it's, as we've said before, it's just a matter of us all sort of sharing the space. So I am going to share my desktop again, and we're going to have a QA. I do not. Okay. I am not seeing. Okay, there it is. Share screen. All right. So we are going to now have a QA session for Jasmine and for Chris. For your questions, if you could just type them in, and then we will be able to have a look at that. I'm trying to see more. So I've got the chat space open, and let me just see if I can see what we have here for questions. Do you see any questions, Crystal? I am not seeing any questions here.
Nope, not yet.
Okay, just making sure I've got the right view on. All right, I'm just going to give that a couple of more seconds. If anybody has a question, you can just go to your chat area and type it down. Okay, I see one there. It's Dawn, you mentioned a target date for your public facing course to become available. Can you share that with us?
That question, I think, is targeted to me with Water Skiing Wakeboard Canada. We're trying to get that out ideally by this spring. So I've just got some staffing issues where I lost the person who was working on the program with me, but it's definitely a priority, and we would like to get it out as soon as possible.
Okay, that's wonderful. And I apologize. I think the question said Dawn, but it was obviously Jasmine that he meant. Okay, and this next question says, will we ever see a pan-country regulation given all the types of lakes we have? That's not targeted towards anybody in particular. I think that actually might be a question that we can answer in the regulations section. And Dawn from Transport Canada is probably the best person to ask that. And so I will remember that question because I'm not sure, Chris, if you'll be there for the whole section, but for sure we will ask that at that time. Jasmine also has a comment here. She knows from Transport Canada that 99% of PCOC cards and tests were done online. There's no requirement to be competent in your new big fast boat, but would love to hear from if there's promotional or marketing plans to entice boat owners to learn how to drive better.
Yes, and so that's part of why we're putting this curriculum together, because we really want to be able to work with the marinas to be able to offer this to their new boat clients, those who are coming in, buying a boat, and offering that to them. So we see the marinas as a key and important partner in getting this out to everybody, and then working with tourism associations, cottage associations, etc.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. This question's for Chris. I live on a very shallow lake in BC with an average depth of only 4.5 meters. Wake boats are very popular here, but we are seeing scouring of the lake bottom, which is causing increased turbidity and resuspension of toxins that have been sequestered in the lake bottom. Is there any regulation being considered to control boats in shallow bodies of water? We are concerned.
So,
Mhm.
so apologize, Dan. So in fact, this is a question that probably is best for the regulation section, but it highlights the point that we tend to think of the regulations as distance to shoreline, but depth is a very big part of it, and the type of bottom. So if it is a very easily suspended material, then a shallow depth lake and the prop wash able to get down to that depth, yes, could create a problem. But in other lakes, where you've got a hard bottom, it may not be as big of an impact. So it's not only just the width of the lake, it's the depth and the material within that.
Thank you, Chris. This next question is for Jasmine. In your education programs, what guidance do you give concerning distance from shore, especially for wake surfing?
In our current training, where we work with our clubs and our schools and our tournament drivers, we definitely talk about finding those, centers of the lake, those deepest bodies of water, so that we are away from the shoreline and where, the wake will have the most time to kind of dissipate.
Okay, wonderful. And I do not see any further questions. So we will now move on. Are you able to see my desktop right now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So we're now going to move into the section on wake regulations. And before I introduce our guest speakers, I'm just going to go through what the wake regulations are worldwide. This is not an exhaustive list. This is our sort of preliminary research at this point. But I know that Dr. Chris Hauser is also, as part of his research, going to be looking at regulations in various jurisdictions and then sort of coupling that with the research that he has on impact of wake so that we can make some recommendations. So in Canada, we don't really have a wakes regulation per se. We have distance and speed from shore, something that we call VORs. And I know that John will be speaking to that in more detail afterwards. So Canada, with some exceptions, is basically 10 kilometers an hour within 30 meters of shore. And I know in Muskoka, there has been some exceptions to that. And we're actually 9 kilometers, 30 meters from shore in Muskoka. In the United States, they do not have a cross United States regulation. It's state by state. The state of Minnesota prohibits the use of PWCs within 200 feet of shoreline and swim areas, and that's equal to 152 meters for us Canadians. And they have a slow, no wake speed within 60 meters or 200 feet of shoreline. One of the areas within Minnesota has asked for and received, I guess, an exception for a bit of a stronger regulation. So in Lakeville, they have slow, no wake zone within 60 meters of shore and swimmers and fishing boats and non-motorized watercraft. Is my camera on, Crystal? Because I guess I can't see that.
Nope.
How do I turn that on? I don't see how to turn it on.
I just sent you something that said ask to start camera. There you go. You're good.
Thank you. I don't see that prompt unless you send it. So thank you. All right. Also in the United States, New Hampshire has a rule that it's called the safe passage rule, where no boats of any type are allowed to go within 45 meters or 150 feet of shoreline. Moving on to some of the other states, in Florida, they have a boating restriction areas. So they're one of the few states that actually call it no wake zones. And so they've got a number of areas that they do not allow sensitive areas because of wildlife or swimming or people, or because it's a narrow passage. So they have a number of different areas where they have absolutely no wake allowed within certain meters. And it's throughout Florida different. So just in general, they have boating restricted areas is how they deal with this. In Oregon, they have a rule that you cannot have any boat over 5,500 pounds, so no boat at all. So they're dealing with that through the size of boat. In Tennessee and South Carolina, they have slow no wake zones within 60 meters or 200 feet of shoreline. And in Australia, they have zoning rules similar to Florida, that they look at their areas and they have rules based on those zones for speed, distance from shore, if a wake boat is allowed or not allowed to operate in those areas. In New Zealand, they have a rule of no more than 5 knots within 200 meters of shore or structure, and 50 meters of other vessels, raft, or person in the water. And they also have a very strict rule that people must make sure that their wake does not endanger people or vessels or structures or create any risk of creating danger for those people. So they have a pretty strong law. And in Germany, again, very, very strict rules. They do not allow PWCs or any kind of motorboat on any of their inland lakes. And in the larger lakes, they allow some water sports, but it's in designated areas only. And sort of the consistent thing that we saw in looking at what people were doing around regulations around the world is that safety and protecting sensitive areas was really the recurring theme across all no wake legislation. So that is what we see worldwide. We're now going to hear a little bit about what's going on in Canada. So our speakers for the regulation section will be Dawn Colquhoun, who is a manager for safety at Transport Canada. Then Peter Frost from the township of Archipelago is going to be speaking to us about applying for a VOR exception and his best practices and tips around doing that. And then again on regulations, but not on wakes, but on decibels, we're going to hear from Rob Bossenworth, who is our chair of the Decibel Coalition and a director on Safe Quiet Lakes. So with that, I am going to pass this on to Dawn, and she will be talking to VORs in Canada. So Dawn, you can turn your camera on now and share your desktop.
I have my camera on, Diana. Yes. Can you see me? Can you hear me as well?
Absolutely. You look great.
Awesome. Sorry, I might get into a bit of a coughing fit. I have not been too well, so I apologize in advance. I am going to, Crystal, do you have my presentation or do you want me to share my screen?
I think it's best if you share it. We have it as a backup, but if you want to share it, then you can control what slides that you go
Sure.
to.
Do you see my screen now?
Yes, we do. It looks great.
All right, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. As Diana said, my name is Dawn Colquhoun, and I'm the manager of the Office of Boating Safety, Ontario Region. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I'm very happy to be here. I hope to give you a quick overview of the proposed changes on the regulations that govern recreational boating, things that we're thinking about. They're just proposed changes for now, for the most part. So what I will be talking about are VORs and wake surfing, because that's the big topic here today at this meeting. I'm going to talk about LED signals that came into effect recently. I'm going to be speaking about small vessel regulation proposed changes and pleasure craft operator competency proposed changes. And lastly, if I have a little bit of time, I want to speak about pleasure craft versus non-pleasure craft and the issues that we are facing right now with people renting out their pleasure crafts. And the liabilities that sometimes that can bring about. In the past, I've given you a complete overview of the VORs. I'm not going to do that now, but I will give you a little bit of what it is about. So basically, a VOR is it's sorry, I keep saying VOR. It's Vessel Operation Restriction Regulation. I apologize for using these acronyms. If we're just so used to that, it's almost legalese here. So what is the VOR? Oh, good, I spelled it out there. How nice. So it's a regulation under the Canada Shipping Act 2001. It regulates the operation of vessels, the activity of the vessels on the water. It could be an entire lake. It could be part of a lake. So how is it used? If anyone, these restrictions are a last resort to solve any issues on the water. So it's definitely not a quick fix. A municipality that needs a restriction will apply to Transport Canada. They will send us an application. It takes around 2 years from the receipt of the application to the time that the regulation comes into effect. And the municipality has to have actually done some homework prior to that. They have to be able to say they've tried other things that non-regulatory options, but it didn't work, and why they want to go this regulatory route. So this is a last resort. We don't claim that this is an easy process. It is used to make a restriction on the waterway. There are many schedules in under the regulation. We have 7 schedules, and if there is a provision in the schedule targeting a certain activity, then you can apply for a restriction against that schedule. Now we have some proposed changes to the VORs. Consultations on these are coming in a few weeks. It will be on our Let's Talk Transportation website. There are some policy amendments. There are 2 new restrictions that are being proposed for Big Tub Harbor, applied by Parks Canada. There's an exemption for Indigenous Canadians, where a person operating a vessel for the purpose of exercising a right recognized by Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, they will be exempt from the VORs. And of course, we have a new schedule to address wake surfing concerns. Like I said, if we presently have some schedules, and Schedule 7 actually addresses wake surfing, but it also includes all kinds of other towing activities, so water skiing, wakeboarding, all sorts of stuff. So based on the concerns from different municipalities and local authorities, we have come to realize that wake surfing on its own is an issue in many bodies of water. So we decided to create a new schedule to address wake surfing only. These are the schedules we presently have. So like this one here is all vessels prohibited. This next one is no power-driven vessels, includes electrical propulsion. This one is no power-driven vessels. The difference with this one is I can't remember what that was, so I'm so sorry. So this one is no power-driven vessels, includes electrical propulsion. This also includes electrical propulsion. I know that, but I believe there is a power limit. Yes, there is a power limit to these power-driven vessels. On Schedule 4, there's an engine power limit. So if it's more than 10 horsepower, you can apply for a restriction to restrict vessels more than 10 horsepower. Schedule 5 has been repealed because Schedule 5 was a speed restriction as well as Schedule 6. They've just combined the two. It's Schedule 6 now, it's a speed restriction. And like I said, Schedule 7 presently has vessels that towing activities can be prohibited under that one. But like I said, if a municipality applied for a restriction under Schedule 7, it would lump everybody together. All towing activities would be prohibited. So we're creating a new schedule, which would be Schedule 9, prohibiting only wake surfing And it is not to do with the boat itself. The boat is fine. The boat wake, we're not prohibiting wake boats. Please understand that. We are only prohibiting the activity of wake surfing, and it will be allowed during permitted periods. So it will be restricted for certain periods of time. So it's not going to be like a ban on the lake or anything like that. And of course, Schedule 8 is a permit is required to hold a sporting recreational event or activity. Last year, I spoke to you about that TC was considering allowing LED signals as an alternative to pyrotechnics. And the policy was written, completed all approvals at all levels, and came into force on November 9th, 2021. So this policy is only applicable to pleasure craft. If you'd like to read the Tier 1 policy in its entirety, please just Google it. It will come up. Just Google it by that name that you can see, and it will come up. So now you can choose to carry an approved LED signal along with an approved smoke signal for daytime use instead of all the pyrotechnics that you had to carry before. This came about as a request from Canadians. You know, they wanted to see a change because it's so hard to dispose of flares. We listened and we have come up with this. Now, this is not a regulation yet, although it is totally accepted. We teach this to the cops, so they will accept it. It is a policy right now, but it will be going into our regulations as well. So the change is coming to the pleasure craft operator competency. I mentioned last year about the rental boat safety checklist. And we had a long consultation period. I believe it was 65 days, and we heard from all kinds of marine trade associations, boat rental businesses, coast providers, boaters, and members of the public. And based on all the feedback we received, at first we wanted to rescind the rental boat safety checklist completely, but based on all the feedback that we got, the new proposed regulation is going to be that the rental boat safety checklist can only be used by boaters 21 years of age and older when renting a PWC. If they're younger than that, they will need to have a PCOC. However, if they still want to use the rental boat safety checklist and they don't have a PCOC, obviously, they will have to ride with someone who is at least 25 years old in order to be supervised. And lastly, the proposed changes give the minister powers to cancel a PCOC. Right now, you know that the PCOC is good for life, and we cannot revoke that even for medical reasons. And that's one of the reasons why we need to have this in the regulation, because there are times even family members will write to us and say, well, my husband or whoever needs to have this revoked because he's not capable anymore. He's ill, but he doesn't see it. So we need to have, so the minister now will have powers to cancel a PCOC as it becomes necessary. So these proposed changes are looking to be published in Canada Gazette 1 in April of 2023. Generally, when we publish something in Canada Gazette 1, a proposed regulation, there will be a comment period after. So it's usually 60 days, could be 30 days sometimes, it could be 60 days, but it takes about 10 months from the date that it's published in Canada Gazette 1 to be published in Canada Gazette 2. So it takes about 10 months. And when it's published in Canada Gazette 2, it becomes law. So I also talked about these proposed changes with you last year. But I wanted to bring to your, so we all of these remain the same. We have not changed because even after consultations, they still remain the same. But I did want to bring to your attention that as of now, licensing still remains a free service. This has not gone into effect, and we don't have a date yet for it to go into effect. It has not been published in Canada Gazette 1 as yet as well. So right now, licensing still remains free of charge. However, please note there are a couple of organizations businesses that will help you fill out your PCL forms and everything and help you get your pleasure craft license or registration if that's the route you're going. However, they can charge you anywhere between $135 and $425, depending whether you're licensing or registering. It's a totally legitimate business, but just remember that if you do it on our website, it is free. So if you accidentally get to their website, and it does come up when you Google it, it comes up first. If you get to that website accidentally and it, they're asking you for payment, but at the end of it, please know you're on the wrong website. We are not asking for any payment. You can get out of it and restart. Give us a call. We'll direct you to the right website. So propeller-driven surfboards. I just wanted to touch on that because we've got some changes coming with that. Propeller-driven surfboards have been banned in Canada since 1999. And the ban applies to any surfboard type vessel that includes a propeller, regardless of whether it has a cage around the propeller or not. So, but in 1999, propeller-driven surfboards were mostly home-built. There was no safety requirements, there was no regulations around it, and so it was banned. But now, with safer, more efficient propeller-driven surfboards on the market, Canadians want Transport Canada to revisit this this ban, and we have. So we started looking at ways to make this a safe and acceptable activity on our waters. So we have some proposed changes. So we have some safety mechanisms that they proposed, like requiring an engine cutoff switch be installed, requiring propellers be protected, requiring the users to carry some safety equipment on board, wear a life jacket, that sort of thing, a sound signaling device, and set a minimum age perhaps of who can drive these boards, just like PWCs, you have to be at least 16. So all these are thoughts, and we did consult at CMAC yesterday. I think many of you might have been there, and at the previous CMAC as well. So however, if you still have anything to say about this, if you are not able to attend the CMACs, you can always email the Office of Boating Safety. The address will be on the last slide, and we can pass it on to headquarters. The same with noise emissions. I know Rob Bosenworth was really involved with this. And we have always had complaints from municipalities about noise levels and, that we've heard it for years and years, and we needed to do something about this. So Transport Canada is doing something about it. So they came up with 5 options. First option was make no changes. That's always an option. Or to modernize existing requirements, introduce performance standards for manufacturers to follow, introduce performance standards for operators to follow, or introduce performance standards for both operators and manufacturers. And after consultations, it was determined that number 5, the last one, was the one that most Canadians preferred. So once these standards are drawn up, there will be consultations again, and you will be invited to participate in the consultation. Okay, so this one, we have been having an issue with people renting out their pleasure craft, especially with companies like Airbnb type companies that have come up. You can register your pleasure craft with them and they'll rent it out on your behalf. Sometimes you don't know how your pleasure craft is being used. You have it licensed as a pleasure craft, but they could be using it for commercial activities. So if you are looking to rent out your pleasure craft, please engage with Transport Canada to find out your legal obligations and protect yourself. Was it last year? No, the year before, I believe it was. there was a fatality with a rental vessel. And the operator was fined $6,000 under the Canada Shipping Act. Now, there are under the criminal code, there are other charges against that operator, but just under the Canada Shipping Act, they were fined $6,000. You might want to be very aware on how your vessel is being used. So the term pleasure craft is defined in the Canada Shipping Act as a vessel that is used for pleasure and does not carry passengers and includes a vessel of a prescribed class. Prescribed class is oh my goodness. Sorry, I think this cold is affecting my brain. It means prescribed by the regulations by the governor in council. So presently we have no prescribed classes of vessels. So basically you just ask yourself when you're using a pleasure craft, are you using your vessel for your own pleasure or recreation? Yes, it's a pleasure craft. Are the people on board your guests, not passengers, guests? If it's yes, it's a pleasure craft. Generally, guests are people who are carried on board, will not be paying you for anything. They might offer to share, like I'm taking my friend out, they might want to pay me a little bit for gas, that's fine. But they're not paying you for a ride to go fishing or anything like that. Are the people on board the vessel paying to be on board? Yes, it's a non-pleasure vessel. Is the operator using the vessel to provide a service? You're taking them out, maybe you're a real estate agent, maybe you're taking them out to show them some properties. You're not really taking money from them for the ride, but you're providing a service. It's a commercial vessel. Is the vessel operated by government, any local government as well? Fire services, it's a non-pleasure craft or a commercial vessel. So you need to be aware of this when you're renting out your pleasure craft. Please do talk to us, because what I've given you now is just a minute part of what you need to know. So if you're looking to rent out your vessels, please do call our office, and our contact information is on the last slide. So you can visit us online, you can email us or call us toll free. If you call us, you will have to leave a message because the calls are shared, but they will get back to you within 24 hours. This is not an HQ number, this is an Ontario number, and we will get back to you ASAP. Thank you, everyone. Do you have any questions?
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I know that you're going to be leaving before the QA section for this. So I'm just going to read you a question that did come up for you as you were talking. It is a description of how to apply for a VOR. I think that can be fairly complex, and I know that Peter will be talking about that next. So maybe if you want to answer that very quickly, and then I've got one other question for you.
Okay, so basically when you apply for a VOR, only a municipality or a local authority can apply for a VOR. So basically any level of government can apply to the federal government for a VOR. A cottage association, a private individual, a private organization, you can't apply. You have to have your municipality do it for you. So I would suggest that the first thing you do is call our office. I have 2 officers that are dedicated to this file, and they will walk you through all of the process that you need to go through. There is, the application is quite extensive. You're going to be talking about things you've tried that haven't worked, and why you are going the regulatory route. There are only 3 reasons you can apply. There's safety concerns, public interest or environmental concerns. So your concern has to fall within one of those three categories. You have to be to be able to explain what that is. You have to show a cost benefit analysis that, you know, any costs to this, any benefits to this restriction will outweigh any costs to Canadians. There's a lot to go through. I mean, it would take a long phone call as well, but we will walk you through it.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a subsequent question to that saying, are the VORs applicable to BC as well as Ontario?
All legislation for pleasure craft is Canada-wide. It applies to all Canadians. So yeah, I mean, my counterpart in BC will forward the applications for her region to Ottawa, and I will do the same for Ontario.
Perfect. Another question, a little bit of a different topic. The new schedule pertaining to wake surfing, why is it only wake surfing and not wakeboarding as well?
You have to remember that when we create a proposed regulation, it is because of what we've heard. So we've heard that, you know, that wake surfing is the issue. And that's why we're creating this new schedule. Now, mind you, under Schedule 7, you've got water skiing, wakeboarding, wake surfing, it's all captured there anyway. But we kept hearing wake surfing, wake surfing, wake surfing on its own, which is why we are creating that new schedule.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know that what I've heard with some of my counterparts in the US, that they're trying to do similar things because it's perceived that it's quite a different sport, even though they're both towing.
Yeah.
And then the last question is the speeds close to shore. It says that sometimes larger wakes can be created at lower speeds. So it does it make sense that you travel at lower speeds where you're trying to control wakes?
I fully agree with that. In some cases, yes, that has happened. But this legislation was created, I don't know, a long time ago, before I even started working for Transport Canada, and I've been here 20 years. However, if we didn't have that speed limit, and they were allowed to do any speed, we would definitely end up with way larger wakes. Just having it at 10 kilometers, if you're unable to control your boat at 10 kilometers and you had to go a little faster, I'm sure the cops will, you know, they'll understand. They'll know what you're talking about if they happen to stop you. But overall, I think having that speed limit just curtails anyone that's trying to speed in so close to shore. We also have swimmers that, you know, really close to shore, and you need to be slow. It's not just all about the wake.
I totally agree. Thank you, John. The very last question for you is, do you think that the PCOC changes will go through this year or next year?
So this year, meaning 2022, no, definitely not. So it will probably go in CG1, and I think I have dates for that. I believe it's June 2023, CG1. So like I said, once it goes into CG1, it takes about 10 months to get into CG2. Once it is published in CG2, it's law. It comes into force.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I know that you took time out of your very important CMAC meetings in Ottawa to come speak with us today. So once again, thank you so much for that, Dawn. And I hope you're feeling better and have a great day.
Thanks, Diana. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. All right. I will now bring Peter Frost from the Township of Archipelago, Georgian Bay, and he is going to do a case study for us. And he has asked me to run his PowerPoint. So let me see if I can do this.
Diana, can you put up the map, if you could, to start with?
Sure. You want the last of your slides, you mean, or?
You remember the map that I showed you of our area that,
Yes, that's in it.
because that indicates where our big issue is.
There you go. Can you see it?
There. Ah, yeah. If you could expand that.
I am not able to go bigger. I do not think. Oh, maybe I can. Can you see that?
Okay. So very briefly, let me give you a description of the township. As you can see, it's a unique township. It's in two pieces, actually, north and south, under the same council. And we had, and the basic thing about the archipelago is that there are 4,000 dwelling units in it. Most of them are seasonal, and 90% of them are water access, which means that the various channels and the water itself really act as our streets and highways. And it's a little different from many other communities, because if you want to visit a neighbor, you need a boat. If you want to go to the store, you need a boat. If you want to get to your cottage, you need a boat. So unlike many other areas that are drive-to, very few of our cottages are actually drive-to. They're all water access, which makes water the principal highways and streets and so on. And it means that we have a lot of congestion in certain areas. And so in 3 instances, the township was asked by local islander association or cottage associations to apply VORs. And we have 3 of them. One of them is in the north. It's called it's in the Scaryvore area. And we have 2 in the south. One is in Crane Lake and the other is in Blackstone Lake. And they arose because the neighbors were concerned about the usual things, speed, wake, and so on. And so back in the late 80s, these 3 bores were put in place. They were put in place by the township applying to Transport Canada on behalf of the cottage associations, and they were supported by the OPP, and they were passed quite easily, and they've been in place for a long time. Unfortunately, management of them kind of slipped through the 90s, and we're just in the process of resurrecting them, making sure the signage and other things are in place and that the community understands exactly what is involved with them. Currently, Transport Canada did 1 inspection of a VOR, I believe it was in Scaryvore, just to make sure that it was operating properly, and as far as I know, it was. So the key to this all starts with the local cottage or ratepayer associations coming to the township and asking for a VOR. And as Dawn has pointed out, it's a fairly complicated and stringent process, and it requires the support of everybody that has a stake in the use of the water. And that is really important, because you do need to have, in the end, public meetings to make sure that everybody is on side. And in those cases, the 3 that are in place, those things were done. And clearly the final solution to the wake and speed problems in those areas ended up in VORs being approved. So what's happened, if you can, sorry, Diane, can you go north on that map up towards Point of Barrel? Just, and if you can go north a bit, you see where that red dot is in Point of Barrel? That's where I'm hoping you can expand. To the right. Keep going right. See, there's Scaryvore and Point of Barrel. So if you could just click on that red dot at Point of Barrel. Perfect. Just bring that up a little bit closer. Okay, that's probably good enough. You can see on the map that what we have is a tangle of islands, waterways, and very congested areas. And the one in particular is the one that leads into the Point of Barrel Station, right where that dot is. It's a narrow port passage. It's very busy because Point of Barrel is the commercial center of our area, and it has all sorts of contractors that work out of it. There are two major marinas. One of the biggest in Ontario is there. The general store is there. The municipal docks are there. There's a church. There's a community center. So it's a very, very busy hub of activity. And as a consequence, we've become extremely concerned about the safety in that area, and we would like to look at putting a VOR in place. So what we have done is, over the last 5 years, we have worked with the local stakeholders to get everybody on board and aimed at towards getting a VOR in place here. And it's a particular problem where we are there in Point of Barrel because it's narrow, very busy, and we've already had a number of near misses with accidents and so on. So we'd like to put a VOR in that would impose a speed limit for vessels coming into the harbor. Excuse me. So where we are right now, we think we've got consensus from the stakeholders. That includes the contractors, the commercial people, the marina owners, and the local residents that a VOR is necessary. We've exhausted all the usual avenues that you might apply to try to control speed. We've put a lot of effort into education. Some of the local residents and even the marina owners have placed buoys in the channel, which don't have any legal standing, but indicate to people that they should slow down and control their wake. So where we are now, we're probably at the point where we're going to take to the new council, which starts in the end of November. Our swearing in is actually on the 18th. As a basically, we're looking to put a VOR in during the next council, which is 4 years. And as VORs do take time, we expect it may take a good part of that 4 years to get in place. However, we're hopeful. I think Transport Canada is looking at trying to streamline things a little bit to make it a bit easier. So I think where we are now, we've gotten a consensus among stakeholders that we need to put a VOR in place. It'll probably be one that would restrict speed probably to 10 miles an hour. 10 kilometers an hour. And that's an important speed because most boats below 10 miles or 10 kilometers, which is about 6 miles an hour, don't throw much of a wake. And as a matter of fact, we work on the principle bow down, slow down. If your bow is down and you've slowed down, you're probably not going to have much of a wake, and you're probably going to find your speed is less than 10 kilometers an hour. So we think that's where we want to head. And as far as what a municipality needs to do, or a cottage association needs to do to initiate one of these, I'm suggesting there's a very important guide that's available from Transport Canada. It's called the Local Authorities Guide, Vessel Operation Restriction Regulations. It's an extremely good guide, and it goes through all the details that a person needs if they want to go through the process of applying for a VOR. So if you could, Diana, just quickly run through the next slides. Just put them up briefly. I've talked about them, and all I'm going to suggest is that if people are interested in this, there is a PDF copy that's available, which goes through most of the points that I've been talking about. Finally, I'd just like to say thank you to Safe Quiet Lakes for inviting me, and please keep up the good work and safe boating. And you'll notice that I've just put that 10-kilometer maximum. That's the one that we'll probably be looking for. But as you know, it applies anywhere within 30 meters of shore. And just a final point, one of our issues is we have so many channels that people boat on that are less than 30 meters wide, we run into serious problems with that restriction. And it's really not observed very well. As much as we can do with educating people, we certainly have some work to do to make sure that our boats are operated in a safe manner. But I would like to thank everybody. I'm happy to have been here today and pleased that I was asked to speak by Safe Quiet Lakes. Thank you, and I will try to answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And we will have a QA session just after we hear from Rob. So I will now call on Rob. I will stop sharing my desktop and on to you, Robert Bosworth.
Hello, everyone. Let me just get my screen sharing going here. All right, is it showing up all right there?
Yep, it's up.
Okay, good. So the Decibel Coalition. I'm just going to talk about a quick review of the problem, what the Decibel Coalition is, and where we've come, how far we've come, and an update at our meeting yesterday in Ottawa at the Canadian Marine Advisory Council meeting. So the problem we're trying to fix is excessively loud boat motor noise on our lakes. It's persistent and pervasive problem in certain areas across Canada. With the advent of bigger, faster, noisier, high-performance boats, it's a commonplace. We have basically searched coast to coast, and we find there are some very significant pockets of it. We know it's in Muskoka. We know it's in Lake Simcoe, Big Rideau Lake in Eastern Ontario. Out west in South Central BC, Okanagan and Shuswap areas have a very significant problem because of the mountains and the noise reflections they get. In Quebec, there's problems in Lake Memphremagog and Massawippi, which are in the eastern townships. And right in the Montreal area, Lac St. Louis, they've got a real problem on their lake. We have, Diana's talked about the surveys that Safe Quiet Lakes have done. There is lots of empirical evidence in the survey and petitions and things that we've done, excuse me, that this is a serious problem and it needs to be fixed. Transport Canada, thankfully, has heard this and have been taking action. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the problem is that we are, unlike our neighbors to the south and the Europeans, we do not have performance standards on mufflers. Our legislation basically says you have to have a muffler. It's far too difficult for police to enforce, so they don't and they can't. And it leads to frustrations on both sides. The police are frustrated and the public is frustrated. Police don't have the tools and the public remains frustrated because the problem can't be dealt with. So we... Safe Quiet Lakes, we formed it, I think it was in the fall of 2019. It's a committee run by mostly members of the Safe Quiet Lakes, and we have members on our committee from Western Canada, very enthusiastic team there, and we have some people helping us in Quebec as well. We formed a national coalition because, as Dawn pointed out, regulations on the water are at the national level, so if you need a national voice to be able to get change in Ottawa. Our members are cottage associations. We have, I believe, if I recall correctly, over 50 cottage associations. They're in BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. It includes our police are our partners. We deal very closely with the OPP, and we have very good relationships with the RCMP as well. But the vast majority of our members are cottage associations. We have 8 municipalities, including 2 regional municipalities in British Columbia. Our objective is to solve the noise problem, excessive noise problem. I'll need to emphasize, we're talking about excessive noise here. And so the way to do that is to limit, to use the technical term, sound emissions through performance standards. And performance standards are basically, you're going to put decibel limits on the amount of noise that your motor engine can make. It has to be accompanied by what we call efficient, effective enforcement procedures, so that the police have tools that they can easily use and will stand up in court. And there are a couple of SAE, Society of Automotive Engineer procedures. These are worldwide recognized procedures for doing the measurements. So where have we come? The Transport Canada's first discussion of this, I think it was 2020, but it might have been 2019. We couldn't quite figure it out at the meeting yesterday. And your committee has worked very hard. We have met every week for 2 years now, going 2.5 years, I think. Every week we meet. And that's how we have gathered 50 odd community lakeside associations as members. But we've also been busy in other ways. Transport Canada has, Don has mentioned, has a vehicle for getting public input. It's called Let's Talk. The responses on there were by, I think, any measure, huge. There were over 1,000 people responded across the country, over 2,000 comments, and 89% of them were in favor of decibel limits. So Transport Canada got the message loud and clear. So did a lot of MPs. There was a letter writing campaign that we initiated. 87 MPs, that's a very significant portion of the parliament, received over 560 letters. So that includes not only MPs in cottage countries across the country, but of lots of municipal or urban MPs where a lot of the cottagers live also got these. We had a couple of petitions. Our Western team was very active there and had a very large number. We had same one run by the Decibel Coalition and National Decibel Coalition. Altogether, it was about 2,300 responses and signatures on these petitions. We also got a lot of news coverage. During the spring and the summer, we had over 24 stories in 107 outlets. And you can see there, BC, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and then Global and CTV News both featured it. We were actually in the print version of the, what's it called? The Ottawa paper, not sure which one. Now let me talk about the CMAC meeting that we were at yesterday. We went to Ottawa yesterday and for the first time we were present in person, because we've met with them a number of times in previous CMAC meetings. So very thankfully, they are proposing to have both the decibel limits to be imposed on manufacturers and operators. We felt it was very important to include both because we want all newly made boats to be compliant. And we have some manufacturers in Canada who make non-compliant boats at the moment. But we also, and it's important to have on the operator so that we capture all the existing boats that are on our lakes. So catching what exists and the future. We were a little disappointed there. I don't want to be too technical here, but there's these two standards that I mentioned, for measuring boat motor noise. There's one called a shoreline, which is basically consider it measuring on the dock and measuring out in the water. The easy one to perform is the one at the dock, and that's the one they have included, but they excluded what's called the SAEJ 1970, which is measuring the boat as it's passing along in the water. And the reason they've excluded it at the moment is that there's some concerns about the difficulty of enforcement. And these have been expressed mainly by the RCMP. The OPP don't seem to have an issue with it. And so they are looking for alternative ways to be able to address this issue. So their main concern is the enforcement efforts it takes to measure the boats as it's passing by on the lake. So they haven't closed their mind. They know it's a problem. They know that we got to get it, but they're not using the tool that we believe is the most effective one to use. So those will be ongoing discussions. It's been a painful lesson, but dealing with Transport Canada, thank you, Don, or with, sorry, Don, rather, it does take a long time. There's lots of good reasons why it does take a long time. However, it does seem a little frustrating at times. We were told yesterday that we get it to Gazette 1 by the end of next year or early 25. So Gazette 1 means there's a chance for more. I think there's a fairly detailed description of the changes that they're proposing, and then there's time for more feedback from the various stakeholders. And Don mentioned that I think Gazette 1 can take up to 10 months, so it could be late 24, or sorry, sometime into 25 before we get to Gazette 2, and it becomes enforceable regulations. So it looks like it'll be 5 to 6 years from beginning to end, assuming that we don't get a lot of feedback after Gazette 1. So as it says here, possible implementation by 2025. Our coalition is not particularly happy with that, but I think it's the reality of the government processes. And we'll have to learn to live with it. So we were in Ottawa yesterday, and we had a very good discussion at the CMAC meeting, and we also went and met with the assistant deputy manager, one level down, and I don't remember the exact title, but we were in the headquarters for Transport Canada, and we discussed exactly these concerns with them. So they're well aware of it, and I am quite confident that when we finally get to Gazette 2, we will have a very effective ability to enforce decibel limits on excessively loud boats. So I'll stop there, and Diana, over to you for questions.
Awesome, thank you. And if you could just stop sharing your.
I will. Let's figure it out. Where is it? Wow, can you read your questions while I try to find it?
Yes. So I think while Rob is doing that, there is one question that I see that has come in. Since exhaust can be modified or removed by operators. Oops. Why did that disappear? I've just lost my question. It was talking about since exhaust can be modified, how is that
yeah, I see the question.
yeah, since exhaust can be modified.
How can is it critical to accept, so the approach that we're taking and that Transport Canada is taking is that we're measuring sound. In my opinion, you could take all the reference to mufflers out and just say your boat can't make any more noise than this based on these two measurement processes. So I think it's Andy who's asking the question. If operators decide to modify their boat, they modify it so that it's too loud, it won't meet the standards and it will become illegal.
Thank you, Rob. And are there any other questions for either Peter in regards to applying for VORs or for Rob in regards to decibel limits? I do not see any more questions. Controlling wakes. It seems 10 kilometers speed limit will still result in adverse wakes. Regulations should require operator to create no wake. I think that's a statement, maybe not a question, but I I think that that makes sense. And there is another question here. I'm having a hard time. How will they try to build consensus on the point barrel VOR application? So that's your question, Peter. How will,
excuse me, I didn't quite catch the question.
how will you build consensus with stakeholders for your VOR application?
Good question. It's been a work in progress for 5 years. Initially, going back about 5 or 6 years, there was a reasonably serious amount of concern expressed by some of the, especially the commercial operators. So we started way back 5 years ago dealing with the local contractors, talking to them, to the marinas, the marina owners, to the people whose business it was to traverse this particular part of Point of Barrel Harbor. And gradually, and more recently, very quickly, it would appear we got the backing of the major stakeholders in the area. And it was through, I think, meeting, talking, explaining the issues. Some of them were self-evident, and in fact, the operators of the marinas became very concerned about it, partly because they were having these boats go by their docks and throwing wakes and so on and so forth. So it became, as I said, a bit self-evident among a lot of the people who had an interest in Point of Barrel Harbor and making it safer. And so we just built consensus among the people that use it. And we're at the point now, obviously, public meetings and some other issues have to be held, but we think we've got that solid consensus that will allow us to go forward with it. But I can tell you that it was not easy. It took a lot of time, and we have a number of counselors that are active in the area who made it their business to talk to everybody that had an issue and a stake in the harbor. And the result of it was consensus. And I think that's where we are now.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. I know when we had a talk a couple of days ago that you had really expressed that getting all of the stakeholders together, having those meetings, listening to everybody's point of view, and then building that consensus was not only one of the requirements in the VOR process, but one of the critical ways to make it happen. Because if you don't have that consensus, if you haven't got agreement with everyone, then Transport Canada is not going to be giving that VOR exception.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, both Rob and Peter, for answering those questions. And I think that we've had a really good session today. I think we've explored a lot of new research that's being done. A lot of it in Canada is really at the forefront of that. So thank you to Dr. Chris Hauser for letting us know a little bit more about that. We've talked about some regulations worldwide, along with the VORs and the regulations that Transport Canada is looking to bring in. We've talked to the water ski and wakeboard industry and know that they're very concerned about educating their recreational users to be mindful of sharing the space. And so I think that we're all heading for a good place where this is concerned, and we will keep the conversation going. I want to thank everybody for joining us today and spending the last couple of hours listening to us about wakes and research and legislation. And we would love to answer all of your questions. If you think of something after the session is over, please send an email to outreach@safequiet.ca or chair@safequiet.ca, and we will be happy to answer your questions. If they're of technical nature for Transport Canada, Dawn has extended the invitation to answer those questions herself. So either reach out to her on her email or send it to us and we will forward it to you. And I would also like to end not only by thanking you for joining us today, but for our sponsors who fund our work and take great interest in what we do. And without them, none of this could be possible. So thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.